Yeah, this is my talk, Modern CSS Development, Tooling and Workflows. Thank you so much for being here and really grateful to have your time like this. I'll kind of skim past the About Me section because we've not got long and there's a lot of slides to get through. But yeah, those are my links. It's UMAAR if you want to give feedback, ask for any advice. If maybe I cover a tool that maybe I skim too quick in this talk with, then go and message me and make sure you find out. The agenda for today is quite a lot of topics here. There's code snippets, AI tools, editor tips and tricks, Devtools stuff, and performance debugging. And finally, we'll finish off with visual testing. Of course, because there is so many topics here in this one very short talk, I'm going to kind of breeze past each topic and kind of like a scattergun, like name drop different tools. Maybe you take some, maybe you absorb some, maybe you don't, and that's fine. And also, I'm presenting these with a CSS use case. None of these are unique to CSS. So I hope you find it beneficial in like whatever HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. Cool. Oh, and yeah, this is a very slide-heavy talk. There is some motion. There's like a bunch of videos in the slides as well. So just a heads up. All right, let's get started. And this is a little feature that you can use in your editor. And this is all about snippets. And just to clarify what I mean by snippets, it's the, as an example, it's the box sizing reset snippet. And you might be wondering, where am I going with this? Well, this is a heads up that in VS Code, and I'll talk about VS Code if you use a different editor, just search for editor name snippets and guaranteed it will exist there. But the gist of it is, in VS Code at least, you Command Shift and P, configure user snippets, and then you have to write this funny looking syntax over here. To be honest, right now you can actually use these AI tools to generate this for you. So just think about what it is you want to produce and then have the tool generate this for you. But if you type in grid-container, like in my case, it can generate a bunch of multi-line CSS for you, so you don't have to type that in each time. You're probably seeing some like funny looking symbols there. The dollar symbol, the 1, colon, and 3. The 1 represents the tab stop index. So every time you hit tab, when this snippet is finally produced, those tab stop indexes sort of dictate where that tab ends up. And the 3, the digit to the right of the colon, that's just the default value. Probably easier to show than to explain. So grid-container, that's the name of my snippet. That's the trigger, if you like. And then you get a bunch of like nice looking CSS. And of course, you want to pick CSS that you actually, or JavaScript or HTML that you repeat across various projects. That's where it's really useful. Another little use case for you, I've got an educational use case. In case you're wondering, like, what's the point of using this? So whenever a new feature is announced, like CSS nesting recently, the media range query syntax, I'm all like, when I'm in my development workflow, I don't want to go and read an announcement blog post. I just want to be like, I just want to get it there and then in my development, in my editor. So here I've got R media-selector, that's the name of the trigger, and then that produces a bit of CSS for me. I'm also showing the ability to use predefined values, which is pretty handy. I've just messed around with the values. These aren't significant in this video. It's just to demonstrate. And yeah, that's pretty useful, I think. So you never have to really leave your editor, and you never have to rely on recollection. For those of you who want to use this across your whole operating system, for example, because you use editors in the browser, like whether it's GitHub Codespaces, CodePen, JSBin, JSFiddle, StackBlitz, like the list goes on, right? There are snippets available for the whole OS. I will talk about one tool, and then I'll very quickly name drop a few other tools. One tool is called Alfred, which is available on Mac. And the gist of it is you get this little, this keyword or the trigger. And then finally, you got the actual snippet that you want to be produced when you type in that trigger. Here's a little preview of what it looks like. Again, this isn't groundbreaking stuff. I don't think most of what I'm going to show is not groundbreaking. These are just little additions to your workflow that can hopefully help. And this is a web browser. I've cropped out the frame that's using StackBlitz in the browser. Quick summary of the tools. Don't all rush to take a picture. I'm joking. Wait till the slides to get published anyway. But yeah, those are a quick summary of the tools. Espanso is what I would recommend if you're not too sure about this and you want to quickly try it out without spending money. Espanso is cross-platform, it's free, open source, and it's got a very good existing collection of front-end snippets. Let's talk about AI. I'm going to try and be tasteful about this because I think we're all getting bombarded with AI stuff in the and media and stuff. So I'll try and be tasteful, and I'll try and keep it in the spirit of lesser-known tools, which is the common theme throughout this entire talk. Just to get us on a level playing field, just in case there are some of you who aren't familiar with the concept of prompting, I just want to, again, it's just about getting us on that level playing field. You can go to any one of these, language model tools like ChatGPT, Bard, and so on, and you can give it a prompt like, convert these to use logical CSS properties. And then you chuck in a bunch of CSS that doesn't use logical properties, and then it'll spit out the transformed version. With very narrow and discrete tasks like this, it seems to work pretty accurately. Don't be that person that just blindly copies and pastes it into your code. Make sure you're aware of the accessibility, the performance repercussions of what it is you're copying and pasting. But with discrete tasks like this, so far in my experiments, it seems to work well. Like me personally, I don't tend to use like utility frameworks. I don't really use JavaScript frameworks either. So it's very handy at converting, like transforming this sort of code as well. So if I'm encountering some code that is full of utility classes, like 500 or so, it will give me the transformed version in I say semantic in air quotes because that is a very subjective thing, but these are prompts that you can ask. Sometimes I feel like a ninja going into people's code bases and like ripping out the JSX and just going back with plain HTML. But anyway, AI with your code base. So this is kind of the more lesser known tool that I wanted to talk about. Little disclaimer, be mindful about privacy when you do this. I'm using it with repositories that I definitely have permission to use. So if you want to use it with your company's code base, make sure you have permission to do that. I'm going to cherry pick just one of these tools. They're getting released every day now, but I'm going to cherry pick one because I think it's pretty impressive. The idea is you give it your entire source code repository, and you can ask it very vague questions, and I'll give an example of what that looks like in a second. I'm going to use this. Again, it's not important what it is. It's just a silly repository, a silly web app that I made for a coding challenge a long time ago. All you have to pay attention to is that there's a bland submit button, or rather an unstyled submit button. So I download bloop.ai, and I give it my entire repository. I don't have to have a particular file open. So even this repository has Markdown, CSS, JavaScript, like unit tests, server-side code, and more. It still is able to, you'll see, it's still able to figure stuff out. So I say, the submit button looks boring. It's not even a question. And it does a decent job at, figuring out what it is I want. So it chucks me some CSS to hopefully spice it up a little. And yeah, the CSS works. It's aligned somewhat with my, the existing patterns that I'm using in my code base. And there you go. You get a little fade in transition. It's color matched the button with the text. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So again, not groundbreaking. I don't think any of this stuff is, but just little tips that can hopefully improve your development experience. I don't suggest you use AI to add animations all over the place. That's not a future that anybody wants. But again, just as a fun experiment, can I ask it for a wiggle animation when I hover over that same submit button? So yes, it generates the keyframe animations. I ask a follow-up question, make the animation stop after 1 second, and it gives me the animation iteration count property. It's all good. Quick preview of what that looks like. All right, cool. Again, don't do this, but this is just to give you an example. Really, the thing that stands out to me is the fact that these files were not open. I was not prompting the tool bloop.ai in this case. I was not prompting it. So with large repositories, I think that's quite an exciting and compelling use case. I've tried a lot of these tools for the sake of this talk. I've really tried a lot, and there are a lot. Trust me. So far, interestingly, only Bloop and CoPilot Chat have really stood out. I put a little asterisk to CoPilot Chat because there's a wait list currently, so yeah, just a heads up about that. Bloop is currently free to use. You can get started with that. Just to get us on the level playing field, maybe you're using CoPilot in your day-to-day job, so I'll try not to spend too long talking about the kind of the regular stuff that we all know, but again, level playing field. In case you didn't know, you can download CoPilot and type in a selector like .stickyheader, and then it'll kind of ghost text for you the most likely set of properties and values that it thinks you want for this selector. Okay. You can also download CoPilot Chat, which is kind of a supplementary extension in VS Code, and then you get this interactive window, and here I'm saying header, sidebar, main area, and footer, -CSS grid, so not even a question, and it generates a diff, which is pretty cool. So it's got all the the grid template areas, that's quite nice. And yeah, I can accept, I can reject, I can adjust my prompts. I have to get rid of some extra parentheses there, but yeah, generally pretty cool feature. But what I wanted to show you, the kind of, again, it's all about these lesser known tools or these hopefully alternative use cases that maybe you didn't think about. It's the ability to code with your voice. There's two extremes when it comes to coding with voice. I think there's one extreme, which I've seen in the past, like way before these AI tools, where it's like, you have to be very descriptive, you have to use very accurate terminology. You have to say things like, dot logo, new property, color, colon, red, semicolon, and you have to like speak like that, like a robot. And it's very, for me personally, I can't pull it off. No way does my brain think like that. And on the other extreme, you can be very vague and very declarative and say like, make the button shiny. And that works. We kind of prove that works because the fact that it works in these AI tools now. But it's the middle, it's the thing in the middle, which is what we actually do in our day-to-day jobs, in my opinion, where it's a bit more, it's a mixture of being descriptive and using terminology, but not having to be accurate with your terminology. So I'm going to show a little video. It's a pre-recorded video, and I'm going to kind of skim through it and talk over it a little bit. This is going to be coming, a little disclaimer, you can use it now, but this is going to be coming through at least CoPilot Voice, and I'm sure there'll be a million other tools to do this as well. But I'm showing a kind of alternative workaround because I'm not on that waiting list. So it's a little use case I wanted to present to you. The tool that I've got in front of me is a speech-to-text program. I'm using Whisper. You can use your built-in operating system's voice dictation software. It should work. But for my, my pronunciation of things, this works very well. Okay, now I'm going to take some random CSS. Even this is a pre-recorded video, you have to trust me, it's random. And I'm going to be reciting the CSS that I see, and I'm going to be seeing, can I reproduce it with voice? Dot logo, width 120 pixels, height 120 pixels, padding 30 pixels, border radius 50%, box shadow 0, 0, 30 pixels, RGB 0, 0, 0, /10%, background color white. Okay, so I chuck it into CoPilot chat. So that's the transcribed text. I've added a bit of speech to this program, I've got a transcription, chucked it into CoPilot chat, and let's see if CoPilot chat is able to take that and convert it into some decent CSS. All right, let's quickly check. We've got width, good, height, padding, looking good, border radius, box shadow, it used 0.1 instead of 10%, whatever, background color, white. So it looks like the selector is the only thing it messed up. I said dot logo, it's used the word dot. Okay, let's see if we can edit CSS. Change the width and height to 60 pixels. Make the padding 10%. Make the border radius 10 pixels. Change the box shadow color to black. And make the background color indigo. Also add a logo hover class where the background color changes to a darker shade of indigo. Okay, so here I'm just proving whether or not we can edit CSS. There's a transcription, right? There's a transcribed text. There was a bit of hallucinations in there as well, which is interesting. All right, cool. So CoPilot chat was able to just ignore the hallucinations, and it's done a decent job at converting everything I've asked for. Indigo, it's added a new star rule with a darker shade of indigo, which I think is what I asked for. Define CSS custom property on the root. -- color B RGB 486278. .toy div width 100%, border 3 pixel solid var color B, box shadow 1 pixel var color B, 2 pixel var color B, 3 pixel var color B, margin bottom 10 pixels, background FF1493, overflow hidden display flex justify content center. Merge all the properties and values from FF1493 into the toy div selector. Change to using display grid and remove the last background color property. It works very well. I've been forcing myself to use this, even I don't necessarily have to. It can be convenient at times with, yeah, from an accessibility perspective, it's great. So I've been forcing myself to use this, and it's pretty damn accurate. I've been able to do all sorts, which these traditional speech-to-text or speech-to-coding tools have struggled to do in the past. Quick summary of what we just saw. We saw ChatGPT and Co. You know, like Bard and so on. They all work very similarly at this point. You know, Bloop.ai, the question and answering thing against a whole repository. And then finally, we saw Whisper, which is speech to text, and then chucking that transcribed text into CoPilot chat. A few editor tips and tricks. Some of these are kind of, it feels somewhat superficial, maybe not the most inspiring, especially compared to some of the other speakers here. But again, if you only take away a few of these things, I think that's a win for me. Okay, so this is one thing that I use quite a bit. This is sticky scroll. So VS Code, Command-Shift-P, toggle sticky scroll. And then you get the outer scope, whether it's CSS, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's HTML, even Markdown, interestingly, you get the outer scope that fixes to the top. Again, it may seem like very, who cares, it's such a subtle thing. I rely on it quite a lot now, kind of like GPS. I've become very reliant on GPS as I have this. So if I don't have this in like an online editor, I'm at a complete loss as to where I am. Expand region, I use this quite a bit. Another nice little plugin. So my key binding is command quote. And all this does is it does text selections, but in a semantic kind of way. So it will go like to the contents of the parentheses, then the content and the parentheses themselves, then the background property, then the property and value, and so on, right? And then you can also narrow that text selection. So very small, but I use it quite a lot, and I thought I'd mention it. Live preview, this is nice. I'm always a big fan of having not having to, Command S and reload the page each time. So this is pretty handy. Official plugin, as you can see. So install the live preview extension in VS Code, Command-Shift-P, and then start the live preview server. And you can start changing your CSS, and in real time, without you having to hit Command S, you get this embedded preview window. And yeah, the changes reflect instantly. Okay, so there's a tool called JSBin. Maybe some of you have heard of it, and that spoiled me because, yeah, you never have to hit Command S and the changes are instant, which interestingly enough, we associate these online editors as being instant, but very often there is like a 1-2 second delay to see your changes on the page. You might think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. This is genuinely a workflow I adopt sometimes, depending on the project. But here I've got like a bunch of browsers. I've got whatever, Edge, Safari, Firefox. I've got a physical device. Don't know why I left it on the screen like that, because now it doesn't look like a real device. But it is, I promise you, it is. And I've got it connected via USB cable, and that's how I'm able to browse localhost. Don't have time to go into details as to how that works, but if you want to check this out, it's called port forwarding. So if you do a little search for Devtools port forwarding, you'll see how you can get a similar workflow set up. An alternative option, I'm trying, in case it's not clear, I'm trying to present alternative options in case you don't use VS Code and so on. Browser sync is pretty good. This tool will actually live inject the CSS and JavaScript, I believe, which is cool. So you get that instant update without a page reload having to happen. But this time you would have to hit Command S to actually save the file. Anyway, yeah, you can see what a good, how great my naming skills are. I don't know how to describe this, but yeah, it's the ability to use your editor, but anywhere in a browser, that is. So install Ghost Text on your browser, install Ghost Text on your editor, and then they talk to each other. And that's really cool because I am constantly writing code online, like whether it's a GitHub issue, we've been over this, like JSBin, GitHub Codespaces, JSFiddle, StackBlitz, honestly, the list goes on. And being able to use my usual editor shortcuts, like you're gonna see here. So I've got VS Code on the left, JSBin on the right, which is in a browser, sorry, and I'm typing into VS Code, and then it's using some sort of WebSocket thing to inject those changes in. So that way I get to use my usual themes, my usual whatever shortcuts. I get to maintain my development experience. And of course, this works in CodePen. And by the way, at this point, I've just hidden the CSS pane entirely, and that works. So I think that's really nice. Definitely use this quite a bit. Jump to destination, again, a very small thing. This is not going to rapidly change your development experience. I assume for those of you who are like Vim users, maybe you have a better workflow than this, but this is just something for me personally I quite enjoy. This is the ability to display abbreviations over your code, and it's like semantic, so it's not just random abbreviations, it's over the parts that you are most likely going to want to jump to. I use Jumpy, but there's a lot of these. You can search for tools like Easy Motion, Ace Jump, Jumpy, but I'm using Jumpy. So let's say I want to jump to text align center. All right, so the word center, I'm going to hit Command semicolon, which is my keyboard shortcut, and then AU is presented over the word center. So I type in AU into my keyboard, and it places the cursor there. Cool. Nice little time saver for me. And yeah, very quick summary of what we just saw. So we saw sticky scroll, the ability to stick the current scope to the window, to the viewport rather. We saw expand region, which is structural selection, a live preview, and Jumpy, so jumping to different destinations in your code. Let's talk about Devtools. I could do a whole workshop on Devtools. I have, in fact. I could do an entire talk on Devtools. There's so much goodness in there. Don't have time, so I'm only going to stick with one particular theme, which is all to do with persisting of CSS and technically JavaScript changes. However, if you do want to go and check stuff out, umaar.com/dev-tips. I try and publish a bunch of interesting features to do with Devtools there. So again, all I'm going to talk about in this, when it comes to Devtools, is the spirit of persisting your changes within Devtools. And it'll make sense when I get into it. 3 techniques I'm going to cover. One is the styles pane. Couldn't think of a better term for this, but if you Command-Shift-P, go to the experiments panel within Devtools, and enable this experiment called Sync CSS Changes in the styles pane. This is kind of nice because, again, it's not groundbreaking at all. This isn't like going to rapidly change your workflow. All it does is it highlights the changes that you've been making. That's it. I wanted to mention this because since I enabled this experiment, I've genuinely found it very useful. I use it all the time because I am constantly adding styles to the styles pane. So I thought this was very useful. You can also Command-Shift-P, go to the changes panel, and then you get this dedicated view that shows you all the changes that you've been making. You can reveal all those changes. You can copy them to your clipboard, paste it directly in your editor. Feature number 2, again, within the same spirit of persisting those changes within Devtools, it's called local overrides. So sources panel, overrides, pane, and enable it. Then just give it a random folder on your desktop like I have. And then from that point on, all changes that you make in Devtools will persist. But it's interesting. It won't persist to your actual source code repository. It will persist to this temporary folder that you've kind of chucked, whatever, on your desktop or in your downloads folder. You're probably asking, what is the use case here? And I think I've got a pretty good one. This is definitely something I use all the time. But a few people are asking, when would I use this? So I think it's important to mention. If you have a fix in mind, let's say there's a performance issue on your website, and you're like, I've got a fix in mind, but I don't want to actually commit it to my source code. I just want to try it out. You can make that change via local overrides, and then from that point on, every time you reload the browser, that change will persist. Then you can record these performance profiles. Then you can disable local overrides, record another performance profile, and then compare the two. And I think that's a very practical workflow to do. Cool. And of course, if you're, it's Friday night, you're at a party and you want to be the life of that party, you go into your bank account balance and you use local overrides to change it. It's a lame joke there. Sources panel, file system. So this is feature number 3, all within the spirit, again, of persisting your code changes. So go to the sources panel, go to the file system pane, and add your actual source code repository. So if your actual source code is in a folder called website, add that folder to this. And what it allows you to do, right? So I've got Devtools on the left, VS Code on the right. And as I type in CSS, and by the way, this can be Sass, this can be TypeScript. As I type in, but when I say TypeScript, I mean source map code, basically. As I type in code, it updates in the page in real time. So that's cool thing number 1. But cool thing number 2 is when I hit Command-S, it updates in my editor straight away. Right? Because all it's doing is it's writing to the file system. So these two are kind of kept in sync, which is really nice. But for me, the exciting part is this part of the workflow. when I leave DevTools, I don't go back into my editor. I go straight to my Git client or whatever, the terminal, and I commit my code. So technically in that video, I didn't even have to have the editor open. And I think that's pretty handy. This is kind of an informal way of listing the features of what you just saw. But basically, to summarize, workspaces does it all. Local overrides will also persist, but it won't persist to your actual repository. A very quick one. So this is, this isn't unique to DevTools, and it's maybe a bit odd that I'm including it within a section called DevTools, but hey, I use it primarily within DevTools, so I thought it's worth a mention. Those abbreviations that I showed earlier within the editor, well, you can get those for the whole operating system. And yeah, I think it's really good. I use it all the time. This is probably my most used, maybe Alfred and this, like these are my most used applications. I think it's great having a keyboard-only workflow where you can get these abbreviations over any part of your screen. So here in DevTools, I want to jump to the #FFF, the color, the hexadecimal color, and it's got DG. So I type in DG on my keyboard, and hey, I hit enter, and it puts it doesn't put the cursor there, it puts the mouse there, and then as I hit enter, it clicks. So, but yeah, I think it's really great. Now, maybe there's skeptics amongst you saying, like, if you're going to go to the hassle of like looking at all these little abbreviations, why not just memorize the shortcuts? Why not just use the tab key, right? Well, first of all, tabbing is not always doesn't always work as you might expect. Not to put any browser DevTools down, they are generally keyboard navigable. However, you don't have to use the abbreviation. So here, it's actually doing a full text match. So this is kind of like Command F, but on steroids. So all I'm doing is I'm typing in width, because width is what I see in the DevTools sources panel. And somehow, I have no idea how, but somehow it's able to do a match against all the words in the viewport. So that's cool. I'll do a quick summary of what these tools are. I know it's a lot, sorry about that, but I'm using Shortcut, which is the very first tool. I think it's moving to a paid model at some point. If you just want to maybe play around with this, you don't want to commit or don't want to spend money, Scoot is open source on Mac, and Hunt and Peck is open source on Windows. Let's talk a little bit about CSS performance tooling. I know this is quite a random assortment. It's kind of like a pick and mix bag of tricks for you. But again, I hope that you see this again in the spirit of lesser known tools, and I hope you find some of this useful. All we're going to talk about in the spirit of CSS performance tooling is two things: coverage, right, CSS coverage specifically, but this is also totally applicable for JavaScript. I'm just presenting it with a CSS use case, and performance testing with Lighthouse CI. You might not know, or maybe you do know, I don't know. In the DevTools, Command-Shift-P, open up the overview panel, the coverage panel, not overview, and it will tell you the percentage of used CSS and the percentage of unused CSS. And this is kind of obviously handy from a performance perspective. However, I don't want to talk about this. That's not the point of this section. It's to tell you that you can also get this information in code. And the code is not too bad, I think. So it's a little Node.js script. And the general process is you start CSS coverage, you go to the page, and then you stop CSS coverage. And the JavaScript methods are almost identical to this. And that's it. A little pro tip for you. You can interact with a page. So start CSS coverage, go to a page, interact with it, and interact with it in the most common ways that your users tend to interact with your page, and then stop CSS coverage. Work out what the unused CSS percentage is, and if it's still kind of high, even after interacting, I would suggest that there's maybe a problem there, and that needs to be addressed. I'm not advocating that you start adding little process.exit ones. This is to illustrate a point. It's very trivial. Even if you don't have the infrastructure, it's very trivial to take the script and basically make your build fail, because that's where this is useful. I think most of us, we use these tools like Lighthouse and whatever, the coverage panel, we use it on our local machines. We don't incorporate it into our workflows to make sure we're not causing regressions, performance regressions. And this is more to illustrate a point that you can very easily fail the build if that unused percentage is too high. Of course, you have to run it with something like GitHub Actions or your CI tool of choice. Let's talk about Lighthouse, and just like before, this is not about the Lighthouse panel, even though that is pretty cool. So, Command-Shift-P, Lighthouse, and you get these nice little recommendations of DevTools for kind of, yeah, like, oh, don't have so many render blocking resources, stuff like that. But really what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the greater Lighthouse ecosystem. Here's a little command you can run in your terminal, npx lighthouse website name, and that will spit out a report for you or dump a report to your file system. And you can run this in your CI tool, your GitHub Actions, and that's pretty handy, pretty nice, because through this one line of code or this one like terminal command, you get these reports every time you commit some code. And I think that's pretty decent. But if you're going to go to that effort of like touching your little GitHub Actions file or whatever it is, why not set up the dashboard? Because it turns out there is one. It's completely free, open source, and it will collect these Lighthouse reports over time. And I think like this is so cool. I'm really glad that this exists and the fact that it's free. So here you can see this is the comparison view, and that way I know that if I've changed my team's code, I can actually make sure that I'm not getting worse, I'm not regressing. The gist of it is npx lhci server. That's pretty much it. And you do have to add a few extra command line flags, which I've not included in the slide, but go and check it out yourself. And yeah, I was able to get it hosted for free on fly.io, which is kind of like a Heroku alternative, and then using Supabase for the backend database. Or of course, if you have your own infrastructure, that will work as well. Once you have the server running, you want to come back to your local machine and then npx lhci auto run, and that will start to run these Lighthouse tests. I think it's 3 times by default, using the URL you specify, so localhost in this particular example, and then it will upload those results to the server that you set up that we saw previously. And when you do that, it's really nice because you basically get continuous integration, assuming you've set it up that way, of course. This little slide here, this little picture, sorry, is showing the ability to use assertions, a nice little hidden feature of the LHCI command line tool. And that will allow you to fail the build if you sort of don't meet a threshold for whatever metric it is you want. So I'm definitely a big fan of this. I would really advocate you at least consider this. It can be a bit of like engineering time. These things can be flaky, but I definitely think it's worth it. And this is basically the end result. The whole point of me talking about this was to get to this point. It's the ability to have you commit code or have you submit a pull request to your repository and either fail that build or pass. And it allows you to actually see whether you've gotten better or gotten worse. Cool, quick recap. So we saw CSS coverage with Devtools, Puppeteer, Playwright, it works in all of those tools. Lighthouse, Devtools, and CI versions. And then finally GitHub Actions, which kind of encompasses those two, at least in the use cases that we saw. Phew, thanks for sticking with me for all these, we're kind of hopping from topic to topic, aren't we? But this is the last section, I promise. So this is visual testing. And yeah, it's wild. Just this year alone, I can think of major websites which have completely broken, but in a visual way, not necessarily like an element was missing, just that an element was not, I couldn't sort of comprehend what it was trying to convey. And I have a lot of sympathy for these situations, because I think to myself, if I wrote an end-to-end test, I would not catch this because I would assert the image exists. But how do you assert that the image itself is valid? In this case, it's meant to be a picture of the location that I searched for, but it seems to be code that's been rendered as an image. But anyway, this is where automated visual regression testing can help us. And the general process is, it involves taking a baseline screenshot, and then the idea is every time you commit code, every time you make a pull request, you take more screenshots, and then you compare the two, and you ask yourself, have we gotten worse? Not have we gotten worse, are we different? And if we are different, maybe that should require some manual intervention. We're only going to talk about these 4 approaches very quick, and again, totally breezing through these. A DIY approach for Playwright, a dashboard example, a cloud-based solution, and a few lessons that I've learned doing visual testing over the years. Playwright, I say DIY, do it yourself. It's not really DIY because it's still doing quite a lot for you, but this is pretty much as low level as you're going to get. So you take your existing Playwright test, and all you have to add is an expectation where you say await page.screenshot to match snapshot. And that little bit of code there, that will handle the baseline screenshot for you the first time you run this. It will handle the diffing, and it will also generate, it will spit out an actual like a diff on the file system. So if it does fail, you can go and investigate. Doing this still feels somewhat low level, even it is taking care of a lot for you. So visual testing dashboards do exist. This is Wikipedia's version, and it's nice because you even get the scrubber. And by the way, the day that I took this video, it was interesting because these examples of failures are like perfect because it really highlights some of the struggles that you go through when doing visual testing. Here, all that's changed is like the border has increased by a pixel. Some border, underneath the main page has increased by a pixel. And because of that, it's like displaced everything else. And this is the reality of visual regression testing. So prepare yourself. But yeah, that's not really selling it, is it? So later, we'll talk about a cloud testing tool that can maybe alleviate some of these challenges. Anyway, we were talking about dashboards. This is what their dashboard looks like. Pretty nice. Well, pretty nice for us to look at, not nice for them because everything was failing. Again, it was like this literally one pixel of a change that just displaces everything. But yeah, just a heads up that these dashboards do exist. They're very useful. Wikipedia have open source there, so it's github/wikimedia/pixel. But let's talk about a cloud-based solution. I have no affiliation to this tool or any of the tools in this talk, but I kind of picked them at random. Percy is another pretty well-known one in this space. This is Applitools. They have it is paid, but they have a generous free tier. And I'm not trying to advocate for like bypass, but you can change the frequency of your test to like fit within the free tier, if you know what I mean. But anyway, this is my my website. So I've increased the font size of a button right at the top. It's displaced everything like we've been seeing. And this is like coming to work on a Monday morning and having to look at this, or whatever, Friday evening and having to look at this is not fun. So they have a tool called hide diffs caused by element displacement, which is very nice. So it will hide all the diffs below and it will only show the kind of the root, which is very good, very powerful feature. I hope these features I'm about to show do come to these open source tools. Here's another one, which when I first saw this, I was like, how did this not always exist? It would have saved me a lot of time for sure. This is called root cause analysis, where somehow, not entirely, I'm sure there's some interesting engineering solutions that they've got to make this work. It's able to extract the CSS that caused the diff, and then it'll highlight that for you given a particular diff on a page. And so these features do make visual testing a lot more easier, a lot more practical. A few tips I've learned over the years, and we've almost finished now, but yeah. If you've got lots of dynamic content, which would typically fail these visual regression tests, you can mark exclusion zones. So you can say, for this region of the page, don't fail the build. Personally, I don't do that. I mock data. I mock data all the way down because I think that's a lot more stable. So I'll still do the usual visual test. I won't mark any regions for exclusion, but it depends on your use case. Things like adverts, maybe that's a decent use case for exclusion zones. False positives, use thresholds. So in the playwright example, you can literally pass, like a test name and a threshold. And if the diffs aren't like too bad, it won't fail the build. Isolated component testing, that kind of mitigates against having too many diffs on each commit. Maybe you don't want to test the entire page. Again, it's not as, I don't know. For me, it's not as resilient, but maybe it's a compromise that for your team is worth it. And here's a little trick for you. If builds are constantly failing because of diffs, maybe try continue to generate the diffs and like whatever, dump it, use build artifacts to persist them over some weeks, maybe even over a month. And then at the end of that time period, look back as a team, have a little retrospective and be like, was this actually useful? Or, was it, were we doing visual testing just to say it's cool? I don't know who says that's cool, but yeah. So yeah, that's a little tip that I've learned. Quick recap of what we just saw. We saw do-it-yourself snapshot testing with Playwright, but this works across the board, like Selenium, Puppeteer, Cypress, they all do the same thing. With the dashboard, we saw Pixel, but Backstop.js is another very popular one. And then when it comes to these cloud-based solutions, Percy and Applitools, amongst many others, are well-known tools in this space. Cool. So thanks so much for listening to this tooling talk. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.